What's going on, guys? Welcome to the David F. House podcast. I'm in the studio today with my new friend, Linden Crain, host of Coffee with Crainer. And I had the pleasure of being on the podcast with him, and we filmed it at Lungo Vita. So I said, hey, why don't you come on to my podcast? And he graciously agreed. And so now he's here in the first guest in the brand new studio. So thanks for coming on.
I'm honored. It looks beautiful. It beats my $20 mics and any location I go and film. So
yeah. And actually that's where I wanted to start the podcast, was because the one thing I was saying about the process that, you and I went through to get on the podcast, which was, it's obviously not a process, that big of a process, but is essentially you reached out to me and said, hey, Dave, would you like to be on the podcast? I was like, yeah, I would love to be on the podcast. And the thing that this really stood out to me about your podcast and the way, and you essentially, was that this, like, you had like just the basics down that have been kind of like lost in this world of like, information and apps. And it's like, sometimes you lose track of like where people are messaging you, like, people are texting you, emailing you, Instagram, Facebook, like it's just all over the place, but you just have a handle on it essentially. And so like you messaged me and said, hey, yeah, let's hear some dates. We booked the dates. And then you were like, hey, here's the promotional material that I'm going to send out. And it was just like so professional and efficient. And it felt like you were like not just trying to squeeze it in, like it was like you had really given it attention. And I think that's like something that has been lost. And like, you're like, you remind me so much of myself when I was your age, because that's how I started like a window washing company back in the day. I just focused on like this, like three things, which was like doing good work, being nice, showing up on time, and then, well, I guess it's those are three: doing good work, showing up on time, and then just being like a really kind person, and being engaging and like not leaving people, high and dry, not showing up, that kind of thing. Right. And you have that as well. Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, one is like, where did that come from? And how have you been able to, because back in my day, like when I started my window washing company, cell phones had just come out. Like, that's how old I am. Right. And so cell phones had just come out. And so it was really easy to keep all of this under control, because there was only one medium of communication, which was the phone. Right. And so, but you're still doing what I was doing in this like multi-medium of communication. So two questions, I guess. The first is like, well, where did that personality trait of just like being that good person and being that hard worker come from? And two is, how are you managing, staying on top of all of this messaging and just feeling like it just felt to me like it was just so easy for you. Right.
Yeah. So I started it in 2020, and I knew that if I would begin to work and have other things that would be added to my plate, that I had to have some type of template just to really streamline the process of finding guests and booking them. So what I did is I, created that same template I sent you with all the questions, the posters. So, and I've been doing the podcast now over the past year, weekly, basically. So I have a set schedule where I'll send out the questions, posters by a certain period of time. When the interviews take place is all scheduled pretty consistently. So for me, it was just creating a pattern of behavior that would just allow me to easily incorporate a podcast in my life with all the other things that are going on. And then as for just being kind and persistent and consistent with people, definitely parents taught me that. My dad's in sales, so we really value that relationship you have with your customers and making sure that constant communication is always there. But for me, it was just, I consider myself a very organized person, and I have to see everything. My colleagues at our brokerage will joke around about it, but whenever we set a time to meet or go have beers or whatever it is, they'll get a calendar invite from me like 10 seconds after we talk.
Yeah.
Because I have to see it on my Outlook calendar and have everything mapped out. That's just the way I think. So for me, it's just organization is the top.
And I mean, this is something that I've talked about for so long, and I mean, I'm not even as good as I should be, but like, you have to own your calendar, because if you don't, it'll just own you. And there's nothing worse than like being like setting, I just literally did it, which is hilarious. A friend of mine and I were going to get together, and I'm like, oh, I'll send you a calendar invite. And then I sent her the invite. I was like, I know I got something else on that day, but I didn't do what you have you have trained yourself to do instantaneously. I didn't put something in my calendar and it was a golf tournament. And it's like, that's the entire day. And I'm like,
Yes.
so I'm like, oh my God. And I'm looking, I didn't put this golf tournament. And so what happens if you're not on it immediately, if you say, oh, you know, I'll do it later or whatever, then you end up doing something
forget,
else on top.
yeah.
And then the embarrassment that comes along with like feeling like not organized, you know, is terrible. And so
I find even it's just little things. Like it doesn't have to be an event. For me, it's like it would be a reminder, call this person or do X task. I throw that in my calendar. So like my entire life is in my calendar. Anything, like it could be hanging out with my girlfriend or going to my parents' place. I have to have that schedule or you forget, right? Yeah. People are getting so busy. And we talked about this before our podcast is that we're becoming more efficient, but we're also, because we're more efficient, we're jamming more things into our schedule. So we're becoming overworked and we're not even realizing it at some point. So we have to stay organized and have that management system in our life.
Yeah. And I think the resistance to doing that, like, is people believe that they will have less freedom, right? They think that if they're so on top of every appointment,
and it's structured.
Yeah. But the reverse is actually true. You actually have, this is what I've experienced. You know, the reverse is actually true, that the more scheduled you are, the more freedom that you have. And the reason for that is because you're not in this constant state of like thinking about what you have to do the next day. It's all laid out. Like, you know, even with family time, you know, for me, because now I have a young family, and it's like, if I have that in my calendar, you know, when I get to home at 5 o'clock, I know that tonight from 5 to 8 o'clock, it's just family time.
Yeah.
Right? And I know what I had to do that day, and I know what I got going on tomorrow. And so the only thing that's on my mind is spending time with my family. Right? Whereas most people have so many things on the go and things that aren't scheduled, and they're trying to control it all up here, that that time with family or with girlfriend or whatever is not present.
Yes.
You know? And so you actually gain more freedom. So like, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because it's such a critical insight. And, you know, I have this belief that success is simple. Like, and it's very easy in today's world to make it seem complicated, right? Because there's like, oh, you need to have the proper light and this nice backdrop that we just created. You need to have these nice mics, and all that's really BS, because like, look at the difference in setups of podcasts from mine to yours, essentially, right? It's like, you know, we've both been doing the podcast for about the same time. You show up Lungo Vita with your iPhone and 2 microphones, and we do a couple of like, hey, this is what we're going to talk about, and then we just go, right? And then and if you look at this setup, it's like we got 3, you know, $2,500 cameras and soundboard. I just, you know, redid this thing, and obviously this was an evolution. But the point is that it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's like all of this information that we've gathered of like, hey, this is the mic you need, these are the cameras you need. It's all kind of just like too much information. You keep things insanely simple. And then if you add in this organizational tool that you have created of like just like one simple task that you've done, like one simple habit, we should call it.
Yes.
Of just entering stuff into your calendar has made you a better podcaster than me with all the equipment that I have. But no, it's true.
Like for me, it creates focus, right? And people miss that is you build things into this calendar, and it keeps you on track. If I was just a person that had a to-do list with 50 items on it, what am I prioritizing? How do I know what goes first, what goes next, right? But if you build out those blocks, and I know Mark Wahlberg does the same thing with his. He's actually posted his schedule publicly, and it's like, I mean, he gets up at a ridiculous hour, like 3 or 4 a.m. Yeah, right. But like, I like my sleep, but he's like 3 workout, whatever it is, and has that his entire life is scheduled, right? And you make time for things because it's in there.
And now because of that, you know, you've been able to like accomplish like a lot at like a young age. You're only 23. You got this like very successful podcast. Like I was just mentioning you pre-podcast that I announced, because you gave me all the promotional materials, that I was going to be on the Coffee with Crainer podcast, and people are messaging me, oh, that's awesome, you're going to be on this podcast. I had more family members share that post that you created than I've had for any of the podcasts that I've ever released. And I was like, Jesus Christ, this kid is like killing it. And And because of that organization, you've been able to create this great podcast that's really well known locally. You're also a town councillor in the town of Amherstburg.
Yeah.
And you're running, and you're a mortgage broker, which is, like you had mentioned, is kind of like a tough industry to break into at like a young age, you know? And so a lot of that is just the result of just being like this organized person.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
And confidence is everything, right? Both with counsel and my mortgage business. You have to remain confident, but also knowledgeable about what you're speaking about to get people to trust you, to listen to your podcast, to trust and vote you, to trust and get a mortgage with you. Right. So it's that confidence, that organization, just how you present yourself.
Yeah.
I think is what will help you achieve some level of success in whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Trust is huge, and that's what I found has kind of helped me in all three roles. If we would,
yeah. And where do you think the confidence comes from? Is it something that you built? Is it was it instilled in you at a young age? Have you always had it?
Definitely goes back to parents and mentors in my life. It's just there's a difference between being arrogant or cocky and confidence. There's two separate ways to look at it. And for me, it's just be a good person, lead with your heart, and just be confident in what you're speaking about. And if you don't know the answer to something, and that's how I deal with residents, or if I don't know the answer for mortgages or whatever it is, don't make it up. Be honest with people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. There's nothing better than saying, I don't know. Right. And like, you know, just as I'm talking to you, the question that comes to mind is like, well, like what's the game plan for you overall? Like, what is your ultimate goal in life? You know, like everyone kind of has like this is where I'm headed kind of thing. Like what is that for you?
Yeah, I guess looking at like the three buckets that I'm involved with right now for the podcast is I'm having fun doing it. Doesn't cost me anything besides my time, and continue to interview and share great stories with council. Really focused on this term. Not sure where I'll land in 2026 when the next election is, but we have a number of projects on the go that I'd like to see completed and move forward. And for the mortgage brokerage, I would like to eventually have my own team and like a separate entity from our current brokerage, so super mortgage team. Perhaps creating my own franchise within that team would be a goal. I'd like to lead people is something I'm really excited about. And I'm new in the business a year and a half, but eventually I'll be at a point where I can share my expertise with others and just grow the business, grow my name in the area. So that's what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Did you go to like post-secondary?
I did. So I went to the University of Windsor. I studied business. So a BCom. And then I was actually in my MBA program in 2022 or 2022. And then the election took place and I put that on the back burner for now.
Oh, nice. Right.
Yeah.
And what do you think you're more passionate about, business or politics? Ooh, or am I putting you on the spot?
No, it's both.
Yeah.
I would say, 'cause I would probably spend my 50% of my time doing both.
Yeah.
I love my community and serving people and helping people. And I'm doing the same thing in mortgages is helping people afford a house, right? Yeah. So, and get the financing that they need or get out of the debt that they're in. So both aspects, completely love doing them both. And that's why I actually went into the mortgage business. Was when I was elected, I was looking for something that was flexible with my council schedule. So council was the first priority. And then I needed to find something that allowed me to earn some money and afford things in life. Politics doesn't pay too much on the municipal level. So I chose mortgages and kind of built my whole schedule around council.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, a lot of people get trapped in like, I think there has to be some level of thought put into like what bucket or pot you're going to plant yourself in, you know, because
you need to focus.
Yeah. Because, you know, like I didn't put any thought into what bucket I was planting myself in when I opened up Trios back in the day, you know, didn't recognize that I was kind of planting myself in the bucket of hospitality, bar, restaurant, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, that's like a not impossible bucket to grow real big in, but definitely more challenges would be faced by, you know, in that bucket, right?
Yeah.
With respect to, you know, and the other line of work that I was thinking about doing was like financial planning and stuff like that. I'm like, ooh, if I would have planted myself in that bucket, the opportunity I think for growth would have been a lot bigger, right? And so that's what I think you've kind of done here with the mortgage thing is I think you probably planted yourself in like a really good bucket to see growth. You're already kind of seeing it with the team and everything there.
Yeah. One thing I'd add is that it's important to not have too many buckets.
Oh, 100%.
You can become a jack of all trades, master of none, right? So I'm always constantly thinking about that is I don't want to stretch myself too thin. I'm committed to council. I gotta finish that and make it work with my day job, right? Yeah. So you have to have that balance and not spread yourself too thin. And you need a coach in your life to tell you, hey, Linden, you're getting involved with X, Y, and Z and B and C, and you're going to crash, right? Yeah. You will have that point where you're at capacity, right? So focus on the things you love, that you're passionate about, but don't jam it all in.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where people get trapped. And like you and I were talking about, it seems to be a theme of like, because the reason that I think it's a theme for our conversations is because I think you were able to like sift through all of that mess, and you're doing something like with what I experienced with the interaction that we had with the podcast is that people have become so busy, right, in life. It's just like like I said to you, it's like I schedule meetings with people and I'll say, hey, like, you got time for a 10-minute call? And it's like, I do, but it's like a week and a half away, and they schedule me in for a 10-minute call. And it's just like, how did this happen? Like, how did we get so busy that we can't even jump on the phone for 10 minutes anymore? Yeah. And, I deal with like a lot of higher end people, and like, they respond to my messages immediately. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, what is happening here? Like, what is this? What is this disconnect between like, because I know that we got into this movement of like only answer emails twice a day and like, to create space and all of that stuff. But somewhere along the lines, we've lost the ability to actually just connect to people quickly,
Yeah. And to that point, I see it in my business is, so realtors are a big referral source.
Yeah, right.
There's some realtors that I've tried to reach out to, and they're like, I've reached out to them 10 times and they can't make a 30-minute call or a 5-minute conversation with me. They don't answer their phone. And what it is I think most put on this facade that they're so busy, or just don't have the courtesy to say, hey, I'm not interested right now.
Yeah, right.
Most people won't do that. They'll avoid because they don't want to disappoint.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're disappointing you even more when they don't engage with you, right? So I think even the busiest people in the world have time. It's just, you have to make time for people. And if someone's extremely selfish and doesn't want to give that time up, they're going to say, no, I can't until 8 weeks from now. Let's be realistic. You can make 5 minutes work. Everyone can. Everybody right? Can. So right? That's how I look at it.
Yeah. And I think you're right there too, that example you gave of like, asking somebody, for a referral and they're just avoiding you because they just don't want to say no to you, is like a good example of like, let's say like, for example, like people pleasing or avoiding conflict or whatever that may be. There's all these things that are going on in the background. But if you just have integrity, and which seems to be like a common theme for you, is like you seem to be like pretty connected to like just speaking the truth, essentially.
I definitely want to be considered an honest person, right? Yeah. And like I'll have people reach out to be on my podcast, and I'm honest with them. Hey, look, I'm really busy right now. I can't make it work at this time. Mm-hmm. Let people know. Don't say, and I always make sure I don't say this is, hey, thanks for reaching out to be on my podcast. I'll get back to you.
Right.
You're not getting back to them. No. Like, don't create a false sense of hope. Mm-hmm. in business and life is just be upfront.
Yeah, for sure. And it goes such a long way, and especially with respect to freeing up time, because like now, that guy, if he would just get on the phone with you one time and say, hey, listen, I already have a mortgage guy, can't use you right now. Mm-hmm. Now he doesn't have to ignore your calls.
Well, they're wasting your time too,
yeah,
right?
100%, right? And so, yeah, I think that's another, like one of your things. So like one of the things that you've done really well is you've got this organization, right?
Thank you.
Like, yeah. And the second is like, you have this integrity where, you just want to speak the truth, which is great. And then the third piece, which, we were touching on before, was like, just kind of like innovating a little bit, right? You started your podcast, and similar to me, we started the podcast before podcasts had become what podcasts are now, you know, and I just mentioned on my last podcast that I'm in the top 1% of all podcasters because I'm not, but like there's some sort of thing like if you make 20 podcasts, you know, something like 80% of people don't get past podcast 1.
Yes.
And then
or even get to podcast 1.
Yeah, if you can get to podcast 1, and then of that 80%, then there's only like 1% of people that get past podcast 20. Right. And so you and I are in the top 1% of people that have created podcasts.
Now we got to get to the Joe Rogan level where he's at like what, 1,000 something.
I remember hearing somebody that said that like Joe Rogan's like download levels are like beyond anybody that's out there. Right. But he was, again, like an innovator and doing it not so much out of like, hey, I want to become famous by doing this. It was more so of like, hey, this was a passion. He liked having a good conversation. And he said, why don't we record them and put them out? And because of that lack of like wantingness, you know, it blew up into like the biggest, obviously it's not even podcast anymore. It's like a media company.
Yeah.
It is. It's like people are going there for their news and whatever it is. It's unbelievable what he was able to create. And, you know, and I think part of that was like, being able to kind of like harness and get into like that innovative space and be like, hey, this would be a great opportunity for me to kind of have great conversations with people. But like, how do you, what kept you on the, like, why don't you walk me through like what went through your mind when you were like creating your podcast, you know?
Well, a couple thoughts. The first one is, so during the pandemic, we were all on shutdown. And when I was in university, this was in my first or second year, and then the rest were all online, unfortunately, but we would attend speaking conferences with guest speakers. And I figured, hey, why not bring that online? Most people don't have the opportunity to speak with a high-level CEO, but if I can get them have a coffee conversation virtually and share that information with others, it was something I wanted to pursue. I also wanted to introduce public speaking into my life and become more confident speaking to people. So I figured that's a great route for that. Yeah. But what I try to share with others is that it was an idea that I had, and it's something I took action on. There's so many people that have 10 to 20 different ideas. Let's say 3 of them are feasible, but I don't know what the percentage is, but very, very few people actually take action, right? So, and even when you listen to podcasts, there's different ideas that you're taking away. The people that actually take those ideas from a podcast and implement it in their life are the ones that will become successful and take to the next level. So it's about ideas and also taking action. Yeah.
I've always said that, you know, ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's the execution of those ideas that is what
1,000%
makes those ideas successful. Now, the thing is, though, is that a good idea is easier to execute on because it's going to, you know, like, for example, like Lungo Vita is just a good idea. And because of that good idea, the execution of it was, you know, I don't want to say easier, but it definitely flowed. You know, you have a bad idea, you're going to have to work really, really hard to execute on that, you know? And so I would say that your podcast was kind of like just like a good idea, a good time. Yeah, and because of that, you know, you just kind of gain momentum, you know? But you're right. It's like, if you didn't move it from idea to action, then it never becomes anything.
Yeah. My whole life would have changed from like, if I didn't start that podcast, 1,000%, because how it worked is I was doing the podcast and I interviewed Drew Dilkins at the City of Windsor, and like an hour or 2 hours later after that podcast, they reached out and offered me a job.
Oh, wow.
During the pandemic. And I was blown away. I didn't have an interview or anything. They're like, he told his chief of staff, hire this guy. So if I didn't start the podcast, get hired by the mayor, I wouldn't have been introduced to municipal politics. Right. I might not have run for council, and council wouldn't have led me to mortgages, right? So action is so important. It leads you to, and everything happens for a reason is how I look at it. But that action brought other things in my life, right?
Yeah.
And there's a photo that I often look at where it's somebody mining, and they reached, you might have seen it. They reached the end of the tunnel, and there's probably 3 feet, and then the other side is gold. Yeah. And they stop, and then they turn back. Yeah. So that's why I look at like everything is just moving forward a little bit.
Yeah. And in the world of podcasts too, it's like, because it's kind of different. Like, if you make a video on YouTube and it gets a bunch of views, it's very easy to see. In podcasts, you kind of got to go in the back end to find out how many downloads you got, and did this one do better? And so it's like you kind of like are sitting in this room having conversations and not really knowing, how much is impacting people. And then every now and then you'll meet someone on the street and they'll say, "Oh, listen to your podcast on this." And I was like, "Oh, there are people listening."
Yes.
And so it is kind of like this, more of like this. We are doing it with this idea that we just have to keep digging the tunnel, right? And you may be digging for a long time, before you finally hit the gold. But when you do hit the gold, it's like your growth is like a hockey stick. It
was like, do you know heard of Mr. Beast?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So if you look at his old YouTube videos, like they were garbage. But he was just consistent and did it for so long, and then he started to pick up, okay, I can tweak it this way, and then just blew up, right? Yeah. So if he wouldn't have ever taken that leap, where would he be now, right?
And there's no better teacher than, I think I said this on your podcast, there's no better teacher than experience, right? And so it's like even our podcast, since we've been getting more consistent with it, is we just tweaked our podcast room, and we just tweaked our thumbnails. And after I had the podcast with you, I'm like, we got to start doing what Linden's doing with the pre-promotional material. Like, that was great, because it kind of builds some hype. And so it's like in the action, you learn how to do the thing. It's like you can read about it all you want, but it's like you have to be in it. And so that's why I said on your podcast, it's like, if you're thinking about doing anything, you just have to start, because in the starting, it's like, then you're going to learn, oh, like I need this, or this doesn't work, or whatever that may be. And so it seems like, to me, it's like you were just like, in some ways, just like an action taker.
Yeah, that's what I always want to do is I have my to-do list, and I for me, the most fulfilling thing in life is cranking through that to-do list and just taking action every day. Yeah. And a friend of mine who's a motivational speaker with youth goes by the line of small, consistent actions and how that will lead you in life, right? But going back to your point about just seeing my promotional graphics, you wanting to take that and add it to your own. A mentor of mine always talks about taking best practices away and actually implementing it, right? Yeah. So starting a podcast isn't a breakthrough idea. So look at what other people are doing. Look at other people that are in politics or in mortgages, and pull things away from those people. Build it as your own and try to do it even better.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Let's talk mortgages for a second, just because you're a mortgage broker, and I'm like, I'm interested, because I've gotten onto this like Dave Ramsey kick lately. Do you know who Dave Ramsey is?
I don't know.
He's like an older guy, and he's like a money manager for like the middle class, essentially. And his school of thought is essentially get out of all debt, including your mortgage, right? And I'm like, that's interesting, because in my mind always I was like, mortgage is fine because you're borrowing, like back in the day when you were borrowing, like my mortgage is at like 1.7% or something crazy, right? And so it was like, well, why would I pay that off when I can make my money can make 8%? And so simple math. But then I started listening to Dave Ramsey, and I'm like, I understand this now, because it's like, it's about the mindset. It's like, when you don't have a mortgage payment anymore, like everything changed. You're no longer like a slave to the bank, essentially. Right? And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. Now, he doesn't say don't go get a mortgage. He says get a mortgage, but just pay it off as fast as you possibly can. Like, that's his school of thought, right? And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. If someone were to like want to pay their mortgage off as quickly as possible, like, what are the tools out there for somebody that is like now put that on their radar?
I think like taking a step back is it actually possible in their life? Like, does their budget allow it? Right. For those that can, great. Yeah. Take advantage of your prepayment privileges, which are, 15 to 20% lump sum payments based on the original mortgage amount. So you can throw that down right towards principal each year annually, or you could increase your payment by 15 or 20% each year. Yeah. So there's that opportunity. Anytime you try to pay it off in full, you're going to be hit with a prepayment penalty, which is quite expensive. Depending on when your mortgage matures. But a big part of our business is not just rate focused. It's not, okay, here's our best rate, take it or leave it. It's adding extra value. And anyone in any business, it's the value that you're adding, not the exact product that you're delivering to somebody. So we go into financial coaching. If they need to refinance, we talk about, okay, how can we make it better for you to cash flow each month, right? Right now we're seeing a ton of people that are in debt. They, during the pandemic, became over leveraged because of the interest rates, and now they're having to rethink their financial picture, right? So we have that coaching in place, and for those that can pay it off quicker, they take advantage of those tools.
Yeah. And are you doing a lot of like a home equity, like line of credits, or is that like an anomaly?
For investors, we're seeing a lot of that, HELOCs. But mostly it's actually paying off some of those lines of credit, those HELOCs, those secured lines, because they're paying 7.5% interest on it, daily interest. And when we pay off the line of credit, we can actually do it with no penalty because it's a revolving balance. So we're consolidating. There's clients with, let's say they have a $400K mortgage, they got a $100K HELOC, they got auto loans, they got everything. We package it all up into one easy lump sum mortgage payment. And like some clients, like you're saving them like 90 grand over 5 years or $1,000 a month. It's quite impressive when you look at it. Is, are you over leveraged, and how do we bring that back in and put some more money back in your pocket? Yeah,
definitely. And what do you think? Because we do have like this turning point that's coming with respect to all the people that bought houses, at these low interest rates, and they're all coming to maturity where now they're going to be paying 5 times the interest rate. Like I said, like I paid like 1.7. And I kind of locked in when it was at the lowest there, and no, when I renew, I'm going to be at, whatever it is now, 5.7 or whatever. Yeah. It's up there. It's like, it's literally 5. It's like 5 times. Right. And so, it's going to be considerable interest payment increases. And so what are the advice? Like, what do you do? Are people reducing spending, or maybe they're doing that consolidation?
We're doing refinances, a lot of debt consolidation. And the reason we can is because property values actually increased. So we can pull out more equity and pay off some debt. That's a good thing. But as for the rates, we're predicting like maybe there'll be a drop later this fall. The Bank of Canada announces their next rate update on June 5th. So we'll see where that goes. Maybe a 1/4 point. That only affects variable rates though. Fixed rates fluctuate every day based on the Canadian bond. But for variable rates, we could see them coming down this fall. Some of my clients are waiting it out. They want to wait two years until the rates are low 4s. But it's all a waiting game. And I just think I tell all my first time home buyers is, in Windsor, Essex, you need to buy it. Like if you can buy a house, buy it now. Yes, prices went up and it's tough to swallow. But once the battery plant's completely finished, once the Gordie Howe Bridge is done and all these feeder plants open up, we're gonna be at like Toronto pricing. 100%. And we're getting close to it, right? But
and combining that with the rate decrease. All of these people, which I think
the prices will shoot up, right?
Because there's all these people that I feel are waiting. Like because I know people that are waiting to buy, right? And I'm like, you shouldn't be waiting. Because
buy now, refinance later.
Because the second those rates come down, there is going to be a flood of like new buyers entering the market, and not to mention all those other things like the Gordie Howe and the battery plant and all of these things. So yeah, we're at like a really interesting point for Windsor, Essex County, because we're for so long. And it's so hilarious because I remember I was in Victoria, BC once, and I was there with a girlfriend of mine at the time, and her family had bought like all of this property, and then Victoria went through the roof. Imagine being in that market.
Yes, yeah.
Like, well, we were like we were there, or we were in that market. Like that real estate boom that we went through there was like what you hear about in like big cities, and and I think we definitely experienced a leveling off and maybe even a dip. But I feel though that with this rate thing, and with all the stuff that's happening in Windsor, we're going to see another big jump again. And so, I guess the advice is to get in the market.
Yes, get in the market. And like you said, the second the rates drop, demand's going to increase, but that's also going to create bidding wars and the prices to rise. So it's like a false sense of hope, like, oh my God, I got to wait until the rates are back to 4 or 3%.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that they're going to be paying 50 to 100 grand more.
Yeah.
Right?
See,
So
it's about taking action. So it's kind of like the theme of the podcast.
right.
Like,
That person in BC, right? If they didn't take action and buy those properties and decide to back out, like where would they be right now? Right. Things would
that's
be
it,
different.
right? And so you can't, and I think that's the thing is like, a lot of people are trying to like wait for the perfect opportunity or worried about like, missing out on a better price or a better rate or whatever this all is. But it's just like, I've always been a person that just kind of, I have like my saying that is like, I like to build the plane while I fly it, and because of that, it creates like just a ton of opportunity for me because I'm in the air, right? And so you can see things better up there, and
the wing's not on yet, but
yeah, exactly.
But it's flying sideways, going back.
It hurts me, but I would say that there are way more benefits to having that mentality than to have the mentality of like, hey, I want to make sure I check every single box before I take this thing off, and so. I think that all just comes from like that action taking. And if you can combine that action taking with what you've been able to do with organization and making sure you're in the right pot and then also adding some innovation in there, which is probably what I'm guessing you're bringing to the mortgage game is just a younger feel.
I'm trying to use social media to my advantage and coach people online and just not be so like banker like, right? You want to make it fun. This is a major transaction in your life, the biggest purchase of your life. Let's make it fun, right? Let's be creative.
Yeah, awesome. I think we'll wrap it up there, man. I think it was a great conversation, and
absolutely.
Thanks for taking the time to come on. Where can people find you?
There's lindencrain.com for mortgages, councillorcrain.ca or coffeewithcrainer.com. You can find everything there.
Awesome, man.
Cool.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, take care.